Hi, this is Diane Chapman, and in this video I'm going to show you how to make this very cute dog paw, or I guess it could be a cat paw, Christmas stocking. It's from Smart Design, and I will put the link below the video. The original instructions have several pages, and they are originally in German, and then they were translated to English. And the first time I went through this, it took me a little while to understand it. So I'm going to show you how to do it because the instructions for me were a little hard to understand, but the project is actually very simple and fun to do. One of the other things is they have the dimensions here of which size you want to make them. And she does include all different sizes. The one I'm going to do here is this one, and I tried to calculate the centimeters into feet since I live in the US, and I thought I had it right, but I'm going to show you an easier way to figure it out once the video starts, because you can run the first stitch and then just line up your fabric to measure out with that first marking stitch. But first I'm going to show you how to put the name on the stocking, assuming you have embroidery software. So we're going to go to my computer and I'll show you how to do that. So this is my embroidery software. I'm using Premiere Plus Ultra. It says Extra up there, but it's really Ultra version because it has all the extra modules. I've opened it up in the default software, and this is the design for this really cute in the hoop Christmas stocking with the paw print on it. But I want to add a name on here. So I'm going to go up to my lettering and I am going to write the name Alfie. My daughter wanted me to create one for a friend, and that's their dog's name. I click apply, and the name is here, and then I have to see if it's quite right. Now I'll go to home, go to next design to grab that. Now it's not quite centered, but if you notice the bottom of that F, it's very close to the lineup. I'm using the arrow keys on my computer keyboard to slip these around a little bit. And as long as I'm within this border, it will come out okay. But I'm actually going to move it a little bit lower and maybe a little bit off center. So there I have it. Now I will save it. Now I'm going to export this out to a USB drive so I can take it back to my machine. I'll export it. Now if I was doing it on my Topaz machine, I have a Viking Topaz and a Viking Epic. If I was doing it on the Topaz machine, I would save it as a VP3 because the Topaz doesn't handle the 4. But I'm going to do this on my Epic. So I'm going to set it for 4, and I'm going to click Remove Overlap, Combine, Color Sort, and Optimize. If I had the color sort, it might combine several of the colors and not do them in order because the designer may have used similar colors. And the colors actually make no difference because they've only been changed so that the machine stops between colors, so you can do different things that need to be done to the design to prepare it for the next stitching. So I'm turning off all these because I want it just to work as it should without any extra features. I click OK, and I save it to my Epic machine on the USB drive. So now I'm going to take my USB, eject it from Always eject your USB drives from your computer or turn off the item before you pull a USB drive out of the device. If not, you could destroy the files on it. And now we'll go back to my sewing. So I turned on my applique machine. I'm going to start new. Go to my files. It's on device 2 on applique. And here we have it. The hoop I'm going to use for the size stocking I chose is a 360 by 200 for the Viking applique. And this is hard to do with one hand. I was trying to use a device to do this, but it's ridiculous. This is the stabilizer I like to use. It says fobs because I use it a lot for my key fobs. But this is the stuff that I get. I get it from Amazon, and it's a lightweight tearaway. It's very thin, so it works great for key fobs because it doesn't add any extra thickness between the two pieces of vinyl, and it tears away really easy. It's very thin. So I hooped a stabilizer on my hoop, but you'll notice that it's a little bit short of getting into the groove here. But I use this stuff all the time and I really like it. So what I do is I just take a piece of masking tape and run along each side. I use a lot of this masking tape. It's cheaper than messing up your design. So I'm going to put another piece along here, which I can't do with one hand. So I'll get right back to you. So now, as you see, I have masking tape on both sides. So we're going to take it over to the machine, and I'm going to tell it to go. I do not need a basting stitch on the design of the hoop because the first stitch is going to be the layout for your fabric. And that's also the trick to see how much fabric you need. I'll show you that in a moment. Hit continue. Put the hoop in. Click OK. And you don't have to worry about any of these colors. Like I said, the colors she's just changed so that the machine knows when to stop. And you'll also notice that some of these colors are the same numbers. And that's why I did not want to use the color sort, because color sort will combine all these same number greens and all these different colors that are the same numbers together, and it would totally mess up the project. So you do not want it to sort out the colors. In some projects it's really convenient, but for this one, definitely not. So I have red in here just because I'm going to do it on red and I have lots of red. So we'll hit the first stitch and we'll come back when this is done. So the first stitch is done and I took the hoop off the machine. You do not take anything out of the hoop until the very end. So you could see the outline. And this way you can take your fabric and see how much you need. So I line it up to the top and I line it up to the bottom, and that's how much you need, as long as you can cover that. But the thing is, you need two pieces that are twice as long. So you fold it in half, and I have everything covered from the bottom to the top, and it folds twice, so I know it'll be enough. Plus, this is two pieces. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this right here on this fabric so that it will be two separate pieces of fabric that are twice as long as the design, which is exactly what I need. And it actually comes out to about, let's let's see, I measured it here. Comes out to about 22 inches, and this is for the white. So it's about 22 inches by 8 inches wide. But just to make sure, you want to make sure that you can cover from top to bottom with a fold over, and you have 2 pieces of that. So here's my 2 pieces. I'm going to cut it along here to make it 2 separate pieces, and then I need to iron this because I haven't ironed this yet. And when I need to cut pieces in half, I go up to the very edge and I use my rotary cutter, which again I can't show you with one hand, but it's a lot easier to get a straight cut with the ruler and the rotary rather than trying to use scissors to go up it. So there's my teeny tiny cut. And now I have 2 pieces of fabric. One we will use right away, and the other one we're going to save for later. So I have my fabric. I'm using red flannel, by the way. Not all the wrinkles come out when you iron it, but it's good enough. And I have it masking taped. The bottom of it is right here. You can almost feel, in fact you can feel the stitching underneath, but I looked and it's just below that stitching. And I have it up here, and this is just above the top of the stitch. And then this piece I'm going to fold up because we don't need this till near the end, and I'm going to clip this just to keep it out of the way. And then I'm going to take it to the machine and run the second stitch. So we take it over here, put it in the machine with one hand, which is tricky. Make sure it's down. This is out of the way. And now we run the second one. And you'll notice it says purple, but that's just because it's stopped the machine. And I'm going to use red, obviously, because I'm using red. So we run the second stitch. And this is going to go around and hold the fabric to the stabilizer. It's the same stitch that happened the first time. Now for the third stitch, you need a piece of white. That is going to go along here to make the nice top of the stocking. I'm using this white minky, and it's a little furry, which leaves a lot of junk around. So I shake it, and that is also why I have canned air around, because I make canine pillows and I have a lot of minky fur around. And what you're going to do is you're going to place this wrong side up, just next to that top stitch. The next stitch is going to, this is the third color stitch, it's going to stitch right along here. So you're going to tape this down. I'm going to tape it on both sides and make sure it's even, which I can't do holding the camera. And it's going to run the stitch there, and then you're going to pull this down and it'll be fastened along the top. So you can see I have this just below the stitching, and it's fastened on both sides to hold it still. And I'm going to run stitch number 3. By the way, in case I didn't mention it, this white piece should be about 3 inches wide and about 7 inches long. I think mine is about 3.5. So we threaded the machine, and I also changed to white. Not that it'll really show because it's going to be flipped over, but it might show a little bit. So since I'm using white, I'm switching to white. So it ran the stitch along the top, and then I pulled the fabric down. So this is the right side of the fabric now. And I secured it on both sides. It's going to run a stitch along the bottom. So we're going to start the machine here. It's going to run a stitch down just like an applique. And as you can see, it's a little wide. So it ran that first stitch, and just like an applique, now I'm going to take the hoop off and I'm going to trim along that line. Then the next stitch, which is the big white one here, that's going to put the satin stitch along it, just like if you were doing an applique. Now here I'm cutting away the excess around that stitch, and this is when you want a really good pair of embroidery scissors. I absolutely love these because they bounce back. They're connected at the end, so you're really just pushing, you're not opening them. So you're going to pull, which I can't do with one hand, but you're going to pull the fabric away with one hand, and you're going to cut along that seam like an applique. And then it's going to run a satin stitch along here to close it off. So there it is after I've cleaned it up and blown away all the little fuzz balls, because this minky is very fuzzy. Now I put the hoop back in my machine, and this is going to do this big section of white. You want to have white thread in there if you're using a white topping, because it's going to do a satin stitch along the edge. It goes back and forth and up and back to prepare it for the satin stitch, and then it will actually do the satin stitch. If you're familiar with doing appliques, you know this routine. If you've never done an applique, this is how they work. They put down a stitch to show you where to put your fabric, and then they run a few stitches along it to secure it, and then it will run a satin stitch. We're going to do it again when we do the little paws, since those are appliques also. And now there's the satin stitch. So as you can see, there's a nice edging along there with the satin stitch. Looks a little fuzzy because I'm using minky. If you didn't use something so fuzzy, it would look a little smoother. But it actually comes out really nice. Now, this is where the big trick comes in if you did want to add a name. The next color it wants is this green, and that is going to put the marking for the paws. But if you remember, I added a name, and the name is this red down here. So what I have to do is click that one, and it went up to that spot because it's going to do the name next, which is the last color, because in the software I added it as the last item. After this, it's going to say my embroidery is done, but it's really not, because then I have to go back up and do the green after the white. So I have to remember that every time I do that white, I go down to the last color. If you did not put a name in there, or if your software allows you to stick the name in after the white, that's where you would put it. I don't know how to do that, so I do it this way. And also, because I'm using minky fabric, it's like doing a terry cloth or something like that. It's got fuzz on here. So if I were to stitch directly on this, the threads would kind of sink into that and it'd be hard to see. So whenever you do something like that, you want to use a water-soluble stabilizer over the fuzzy or terry cloth so that the thread doesn't sink in and disappear on something that's thick like that. So I have this film stabilizer. It's water soluble, but because the stitching of the name, it tears off really easily. So I'm going to tape this down, and then I'm going to run that last stitch with the name. So my water soluble stabilizer is over the white. I've selected the last color, which is the name. It's up there ready to do the name. I've taped it down, and I've also switched to red thread on top, and I switched to red bobbin also. It probably won't come through, but whenever I do names, I like to have the same bobbin color underneath, just in case, so I don't get any white on top when I'm using a red or whatever color to do the name. So now it's going to punch through that and start stitching out the word Alfred. I'm also going to slow my machine down a little bit. When it does names, I like to have it a little slower. So as you can see, it says that my embroidery is finished, but it's really not. So I'm going to leave the design in there. The name is stitched out, and now I have to peel off that stabilizer on top. So I'm tearing this off, and with one hand and an elbow, and a lot of it will just come right off. And then I just have to look close, and there's a couple of pieces, and I break out my pointy tweezers that are over here, and I will just grab, it's hard to see with the camera, and I will grab this and pull this stuff off. And I can just yank this out. Comes out pretty nice. So I will take a close look and get it all off. So there's the name. I got all the stabilizer off, and depending on which way the fuzz goes, some of the lettering will get covered up. Occasionally when they're rubbing, touching it. But it really looks nice. And it's cute with the fuzz. Now I've put the hoop back in my machine, and I'm going to go up here and touch this green, which is the next color after white. And what that is going to do is do the outline for the paw applique. I've also switched to a tan color just because I'm going to use tan next to do the satin after the applique. So it's checking to make sure the hoop is in since it thought it was done. And now it's going to do the outline for the paws. So there's the outline for the paws. And this is an applique. So you choose some fabric, and I'm just going to lay this big piece of beige fabric over, and then I'm going to tape it down, and then it's going to run a stitch around the paws again, and that's going to show me where to cut it, and then I'm going to put it in again, and it's going to do the satin stitch around the paws. So it's back in my machine, the fabric is taped down, and now it's going to do the outline for the paws. Just a quick outline again, and that'll show me where to cut the fabric out. So there it is, it's gone around, and now I have to take the tape off. But also, before I do the embroidery cutting, I like to cut away some of the excess fabric with regular scissors, just so I don't have to fight so much fabric with the little scissors. So I'll show you in a minute as soon as I can get this off by holding one hand. So I cut some of it around there, and then I use these. This is what I use for my key fobs. But I use a smooth edge and go in here and cut between these, so I have a little bit to hang on to when I cut with the embroidery scissors around here. So I'm going to cut in between each one of these, so it'll be easier when I do the embroidery scissors. So I've cut away all the edging, and I'm going to blow all this junk away with my canned air. And you want to be careful not to cut the stitching, which I think I might have a little bit. But that's why these curved scissors are good. They are curved up, so it's pretty easy not to mess it up. And I remember the first time I saw someone do an applique years ago when I started embroidery. I thought, wow, that's ridiculous, all that work. But it's really pretty cool, and it's not that much work. Now I put it back in my machine, and I have the tan thread that's going to go around with the satin. And this designer does a good job at going in and out of the area and making it a nice wide satin. So even if there's little mistakes when you cut, she does a good job of covering it up. So the next one says it's pink, but I've got tan, and it's going to be this big section. And one thing dawned on me, depending on the file type that you use, I used a VP3 for my Viking. You may have a PES or whatever designed for your machine, so your colors may actually be different. It may not be pink around the paws. It may not be white around there. She may have other colors. But hopefully this video will give you a good idea, and she does have the big instructions to follow along. So now, start the machine, and it's going to work around these paws on the outside and then the inside, so it secures it nicely. In a zigzag. So she fixed my little cut mistake there. That one little edge was cut at the bottom, but she caught it. And then it'll do the satin. And cover it up nicely. So this is going to go around each paw and lock that fabric in. Okay, there you have it. It went around the paws, nice pretty satin. Now the next stitch, I'm going to just leave it in the machine and leave the tan, because it's going to make a marker, a little stitch marker there. And that's going to tell me where to put the ribbon that will be used for hanging the stocking. So I'm just going to let it start, and it's just going to do a quick line. That's where I'm going to put the ribbon. Now in her instructions, she used this cute little Christmassy or red and white ribbon. I don't have that. I couldn't find anything Christmassy that I liked, but I have a lot of dog ribbon. So here's some with paw prints, and I have some collies because I do collie rescue, so I've done a lot of things with collies, and I have some fun little dog ones here. So I have lots of different ribbons I could choose, but I'm going to take this one because I'm doing these for my daughter's doggy daycare, and I'm trying to make them all look the same. Now, hers looks a little longer. I'm doing mine about 3.5 inches, and mine is wider. So, 1, 2, 3, right about here, I'm going to give it a cut. So mine is a short ribbon, but you'll see it goes right along that because the next stitch is going to stitch over that same marker again and sew that ribbon in. Mine is a little short ribbon, but I know that it works. I actually just put another piece down here because this one wasn't sticking to the fuzz. But as you can see from the two that I've done already, it works out pretty cute. These are 2 stockings that I've already finished. So the ribbon came out pretty nice. And the first time I did this, the reason I did a short ribbon was I was afraid that if it went over this top part, that it might get stitched into there. But I realized she never does another stitch across there. Pretty soon we're going to do some cool folding and a couple of stitching around. And then we're going to turn this inside out a couple times. Whenever I do these in the hoop projects, it's always strange to see how this works out, and it always works out really cool. So, it keeps popping up there. We're going to run this stitch again. I'll hold this down to make sure it doesn't catch. And there we have it. Now I don't have to remove this from the machine because the next stitch is this big chunk of yellow. It's going to do these stars. So I just switched to this Merit Gold thread that I've been using. I'm going to put that one in there and let this rip. And it's just going to run these stars across. Which will take a little while, so I'll come back when that is done. Okay, the stars are done. They look nice. And now comes the weird turning parts. Now what you want to do is remember that second piece of fabric we had here. You're going to fold it in half. So you have one piece of fabric folded directly in half. And I'm going to fix this once I put the camera down and make sure it's nice and squared. And you're going to make sure that I'm using fabric that it's the same on inside and outside, so it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if I have a nice side or a bad side. But what you want to do, depending on the fabric that you're using, you want to make sure that the nice side is on the outsides. And then you're going to take your fabric and you're going to line it up right with the top here. And then you're going to tape it down. So let me put the camera down and I'll get that organized and explain and show you. So I took my piece of flannel, and like I said, since I don't have a good side or a bad side, it doesn't matter to me. But if you have good sides and bad and wrong sides and right sides, the rights are on the outside. It's folded in half. You lined up the fold at the very top of your white fuzzy stuff, whatever you used up there, and then tape it down. I tape it all the way around here, and then I taped it here. It's not going to stitch here, but what it's going to do is it's going to do the stitch here and come up. And then we're going to fold this piece down. It's going to do another stitch. And then we're going to turn things inside out a couple times, and you'll be amazed how it works. So I'm going to put it back in the machine and run the next stitch. So it's in my machine. Let's thread it. And it's going to get close there, but it shouldn't hit the tape. And I've also switched to red thread on the top, and I put red thread in the bobbin. I can't remember if it's this step or the next step when you fold things inside out a couple times, but the first one I did showed a little bit of the white bobbin when I pushed it through. So I'm switching to red, just so when I push out the corners, you don't see any of the white. So we'll let this one run. And as you can see, it's really close to my tape. Okay, now I'm going to take it out of the machine, not out of the hoop yet. This is the last step. Okay, this is the last step. Now remember this chunk of fabric that's been sitting up here the whole time. This is going to get folded down. And let me cut this, hang on. I just trim that tape there just so I get an even fold. You're going to fold this down so it's nice and smooth up here. And this is very, very important. You do not leave this all the way down. You must raise this up a little bit so you can see the bottom, because this is how you're going to turn it inside out. If you would have left this down, it'll stitch around and there'll be no way to get inside of it. So you have to put this up just a little bit. This will be like the inside, so if someone stuck their hand in there, they'd feel this little lip. But it doesn't matter. So you just need enough so that you can squeeze your hand in here to turn it inside out. So you're going to raise this up just a little bit. Make sure it's nice and smooth. And then tape it down. And I'm going to put a little piece here too, because when it comes around, I want to make sure it doesn't catch on here. So I'm going to hold it down and watch it. And it goes around several times because she goes down and back and does a nice tight stitch, because that's the final stitch. And you're going to cut along that and then turn it inside out. So it's going to be a chunk of thread going around back and forth. So you want to watch it to make sure it doesn't get caught. Your needle doesn't, or your foot doesn't catch this. So there you have it. I taped down the sides, made sure this fold is up so that I can reach in there, put a little piece of tape inside the paw markers, but I'm going to watch the first time at least when it goes around to make sure nothing catches. After the first time, it's pretty well down. So I'm going to put it back in the machine and run the last stitch. And it's actually not the last stitch on your machine. I'll explain that in a moment. Okay, I'm ready to do the last stitch, but like I said, it's not actually the last stitch. I don't understand it, but she explained in the instructions that apparently some machines need a final stitch, so you don't do this last green. And you'll remember the red, which is really the last color down here, that was my name that I did, that I added. So this last red is not in her embroidery file. It does end with this last little green, but she tells you not to run that stitch. It's just kind of a extra little stitch that she threw at the end for some reason. Apparently some machines need it. I don't understand that. But if you don't need it, you don't have to run it. So this is the last stitch. And you can see it's kind of big. It's going to run up and down and around for a few times. So I'll just show you a little bit of it. Now it's going to go up and back a couple of times and do a zigzag and really make it a tight last stitch all the way around. Okay, there you have it. It is done. And now we can take it out of the hoop, take all the tape off and everything, and you can see there's really a nice tight stitch. You're going to cut around here, leaving a little gap. I get pretty close. Some people like to leave a little more. And she also recommends that when you get to these spots, like here and in here, that you give a little cut going in so that when you turn this inside out, you can really push out those edges. I get pretty close. So I did clip a little bit into the edging here. You don't want to clip the threads, obviously, but depending on how much you leave as you cut around here. If you leave a fair amount, you want to cut in there. So when you jam these corners out, when you turn it inside out, you can really push them out nice. And just what I like to do when I have all this nonsense hanging out the sides before I grab my good scissors and do the close trimming, I take the rotary and a ruler and cut off some of the big junk around the sides with the tape and all that. And then I can get down to concentrating on a nice smooth cut with the good sewing scissors. So there's my cutout. I put a little snip here and here and here, but I cut pretty close. I do a lot of key fob, so I'm pretty good at that, cutting close enough. Now the fun part, because now you still have this paper stabilizer back here. So you got to start ripping and tearing all this stuff off, which I will do now. So there's mine after I tore off pretty much all of the stabilizer. It doesn't have to be perfect. You just want to get a fair amount of it off so it's not crunchy. You want your stocking to be soft. And I also cut some of these bobbin threads in between here so it's flexible and the threads aren't tugging and pulling in between the paws and stuff. I don't have to clip them all the way off. No one's really going to see it, but I like to cut between so they're not snagging. Now, you're going to turn this over and you're going to reach your hand in here, which I cannot do with one hand, so I have to put the camera down. And you're going to turn this inside out. And then you're going to turn it inside out a second time. I'll show you. First, we'll do the first one. So I reached in that fold, and I turned it inside out. Now it looks like this. That's still the backing. And now, I'm going to smooth that out a little better. And then, that's the inside. Then you're going to reach in here and turn it inside out again. And there you have it. I turned it inside out for the second time. And then you're going to stick your hand in there and punch out those paws. If you used one of the smaller size ones, you might have to get one of those little rubber stick thingies that jam out the paws if you can't get your hand in there. This size was just enough that I could shove my hand in and push my fingers against it from the inside here so that you push those paws tips out. And then there's your little hanger, and I stick it up here on the shelf. And now there's number 3. So I have 3 of them done out of the 6 that I told my daughter I would make for her. So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope it helps. It's a really cute little project if you have dogs in your life. Or cats, I suppose. You can make this smaller ones. She gives you several sizes. So you could do the smaller ones and make little kitty paws. Thanks for watching. And I'll have the link to this file down below so you can purchase it from her.